She lost 42 pounds in 5 months. Her clothes fit again. Her knees stopped aching. Her blood sugar numbers dropped to levels she hadn't seen in a decade. By every visible metric, the medication was working exactly as promised. Her friends told her she looked incredible. Her family said she seemed healthier than she had in years, and she believed them, until the morning she tried to open a jar of pasta sauce and realized she couldn't. Not because of arthritis, not because of an injury, because the strength in her hands, in her arms, in the muscles she had relied on her entire adult life, had quietly disappeared while the number on the scale was going down. That moment, small, ordinary, almost embarrassing in its simplicity, was the beginning of a realization that would change everything she thought she understood about the medication she was taking and the body she was living in. And what she eventually discovered is something that millions of women on Mounjaro, Ozempic, and similar medications are not being told. Something that specialists in hormonal health and body composition have been raising alarms about for the past 2 years. Something that affects all patients on these drugs to some degree. But that becomes profoundly more dangerous, more consequential, and more difficult to reverse when it happens to a woman whose body is simultaneously going through menopause. I'm going to explain exactly what this side effect is, why it's being overlooked in most conversations about these medications, and why, for women in their 40s, 50s, and beyond, it may represent one of the most significant health trade-offs of our generation. Because the truth is not that Mounjaro doesn't work. It does. The truth is that what it takes from your body while it works is something most women cannot afford to lose, especially not now, especially not during this stage of life. Let's start with what Mounjaro actually does, because the mechanism matters more than most people realize. Tirzepatide, the active compound in Mounjaro, works by mimicking 2 hormones, GLP-1 and GIP. These hormones regulate appetite, insulin secretion, and how your body processes food. When you take Mounjaro, your appetite drops significantly. You eat less, you feel full faster, your blood sugar stabilizes, and your body, deprived of the caloric surplus it was accustomed to, begins burning stored energy to make up the difference. Here's the part that changes the conversation. When your body burns stored energy, it doesn't exclusively target fat. It can't. Human physiology doesn't work that way. When you lose weight rapidly through caloric restriction, which is functionally what these medications create, your body breaks down both fat tissue and lean tissue. Lean tissue means muscle, and the research on GLP-1 receptor agonists has consistently shown that somewhere between 25 and 40% of the weight lost on these medications is not fat, it is muscle. Let me say that again, because the implications are enormous. For every 10 pounds you lose on Mounjaro, roughly 3 to 4 of those pounds are muscle, not fat. In a young, healthy person with abundant hormonal support, this is concerning but potentially manageable. The body has the hormonal infrastructure to rebuild muscle when conditions improve. But in a woman going through perimenopause or menopause, this equation becomes fundamentally different. And this is the part that almost nobody is talking about. Here is why. Estrogen, the hormone that declines dramatically during menopause, is not just a reproductive hormone. It plays a direct and critical role in maintaining skeletal muscle mass. Estrogen stimulates muscle protein synthesis. It reduces muscle protein breakdown. It supports the satellite cells that repair and regenerate muscle fibers after damage. It influences the way your muscles respond to exercise and physical activity. When estrogen declines during menopause, women already begin losing muscle at an accelerated rate, approximately 1 to 2% per year, even without any medication or dietary changes. This is called sarcopenia, and it is one of the most under-recognized consequences of the menopausal transition. Now combine these two realities. A woman in menopause is already losing muscle because her estrogen is declining. And then she starts a medication that causes her to lose additional muscle through rapid weight reduction. The result is not additive, it is compounding. She is losing muscle from two directions simultaneously, and the hormonal environment that would normally help her rebuild that muscle is no longer functioning at full capacity. She is, in a very real biological sense, accelerating a process that her body is already struggling to manage. And here is what makes this particularly devastating. Muscle is not just about strength. It is not just about being able to open a jar or carry groceries or climb stairs, although those things matter enormously as women age. Muscle is the single most metabolically active tissue in your body. It is the primary site where your body burns glucose. It is a critical regulator of insulin sensitivity. It protects your joints. It supports your bones. It is directly correlated with longevity, independence, and quality of life in the decades after menopause. Every pound of muscle a menopausal woman loses represents a measurable decline in her metabolic health, her physical resilience, and her protection against the diseases that disproportionately affect women after 50, including type 2 diabetes, osteoporosis, and cardiovascular disease. The cruel irony is staggering. Many women take Mounjaro specifically to improve their metabolic health, and the medication does improve certain markers: blood sugar, A1C, body weight. But if the vehicle for that improvement is the destruction of the tissue most responsible for long-term metabolic stability, then what looks like progress on a lab report may actually be setting the stage for a different kind of crisis 5, 10, 15 years down the road. I have worked with women who lost significant weight on these medications and were genuinely thrilled until they started noticing things that didn't match the celebration. Fatigue that didn't improve even though they weighed less. Joint pain that appeared or worsened despite carrying fewer pounds. A face that looked suddenly gaunt, older, hollowed out, what some have called Mounjaro face or Ozempic face. A body that felt weaker, less capable, less resilient than it did at a higher weight. And underneath all of those symptoms, a metabolic rate that had slowed so dramatically that maintaining their new weight required eating fewer and fewer calories, a trap that becomes nearly inescapable without the muscle mass to drive metabolic activity. This is exactly the kind of information that I believe women deserve access to before they make decisions about their bodies, not after. After spending years working with women navigating both menopause and weight management, I put together something that addresses this intersection in a way that I haven't seen anywhere else. It's available in the first link in the description and in the pinned comment. If what I'm describing sounds familiar, or if you're considering this medication and want to understand the full picture, I genuinely encourage you to look at it. Let me be very clear about something. I am not saying Mounjaro is inherently bad. I am not saying no woman in menopause should ever take it. These medications have genuine therapeutic value for certain conditions, and for some patients, the benefits legitimately outweigh the risks. What I am saying is that the conversation around these drugs has been dangerously incomplete, particularly for women in midlife, for whom the stakes of muscle loss are categorically higher than for the general population. And the incompleteness of that conversation is not accidental. The clinical trials that led to Mounjaro's approval measured success primarily by weight loss and glycemic control. They did not stratify results by menopausal status. They did not specifically track changes in lean body mass among women over 45. They did not assess the long-term impact of muscle loss in a population already vulnerable to sarcopenia. The data that would allow women to make fully informed decisions about these medications in the context of menopause, largely does not exist. Not because it's unimportant, but because nobody designed the studies to capture it. That gap in the research has real consequences. It means that when a 52-year-old woman asks her doctor whether Mounjaro is safe for her, the answer she receives is based on data that was never specifically gathered for someone in her biological situation. She is making a decision with incomplete information, and in many cases, she doesn't even know that the information is incomplete. I want to tell you about a woman I worked with. I'll call her Sandra. Sandra was 54, deep in menopause, and had gained 35 pounds over 3 years, despite eating reasonably and walking daily. She had tried everything she could think of, cutting carbs, intermittent fasting, walking longer and more frequently, and nothing moved the scale. She felt betrayed by her own metabolism. Her doctor prescribed Mounjaro, and over 8 months she lost 31 pounds. She was ecstatic, but around month 6 she started noticing things. Her arms looked thinner but not toned. They looked deflated. She struggled to get up from low chairs. She felt unsteady on uneven ground. Her posture had changed, and most alarmingly, she had a bone density scan that showed a decline from her previous reading 2 years earlier, a decline that her specialist said was steeper than expected for her age and menopausal stage. When Sandra and I sat down and analyzed what had happened, the picture was clear, but painful. She had lost 31 pounds total. Based on the research ratios for GLP-1 medications, approximately 8 to 10 of those pounds were likely muscle, not fat. For a woman her age, already in a state of estrogen-driven muscle decline, that represented a loss she might never fully recover. Not because recovery is impossible, but because rebuilding muscle after menopause requires a level of hormonal support, nutritional precision, and progressive resistance training that most women are never educated about. And that becomes exponentially harder with each pound of muscle lost. Sandra's experience is not an outlier. It is, according to the body composition research that has emerged over the past 2 years, entirely predictable. And the fact that she was not warned about it, that no one sat her down before writing that prescription and said, "Here's what this medication may do to your muscle mass, and here's why that matters more for you than for a 30-year-old, represents a failure of informed consent that I find deeply troubling." So what should women know? What is the information that should be part of every conversation about GLP-1 medications for women in menopause? First, if you are on Mounjaro or considering it, understand that protecting your muscle mass is not optional. It is essential. This means incorporating resistance training into your life, not casual stretching, not yoga alone, although yoga has its own benefits. Resistance training, lifting weights, using resistance bands, performing bodyweight exercises that challenge your muscles to maintain and build tissue, even as the medication is working to reduce your caloric intake. Studies have shown that patients on GLP-1 drugs who engage in consistent resistance training lose significantly less muscle than those who don't. The difference is not marginal, it is dramatic. Second, protein intake becomes critical. When your appetite is suppressed by Mounjaro, you eat less of everything, including protein. But protein is the raw material your muscles need to survive. Specialists in this field recommend that women on GLP-1 medications consume at least 1.2 to 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight daily. For many women, this means being deliberate and strategic about what they eat during the limited meals they consume, prioritizing protein above almost everything else. Third, monitor your body composition, not just your weight. A bathroom scale cannot tell you whether the pounds you're losing are fat or muscle. It gives you one number, total weight, and that number can be profoundly misleading. A woman who loses 20 pounds of fat and 5 pounds of muscle is in a very different situation than a woman who loses 15 pounds of fat and 10 pounds of muscle, even though the scale shows the same 25-pound loss. Body composition testing, whether through DEXA scans, bioelectrical impedance, or other methods, should be part of the monitoring protocol for any menopausal woman on these medications, and yet, in practice, it almost never is. Fourth, have an honest conversation with your prescriber about your menopausal status and what it means for your risk profile on this medication. If your doctor is not factoring your hormonal transition into the risk-benefit analysis, that is a gap you have the right to address. You deserve a provider who understands that your body is not operating under the same conditions as a 35-year-old's and who adjusts their approach accordingly. And this brings me to something I feel strongly about sharing. The reason I've been so vocal about this particular issue is that I've watched too many women make this decision without the full picture, and then struggle with consequences they were never warned about. I've gathered everything I've learned into something accessible and practical, specifically for women navigating menopause and weight management. It's in the pinned comment and the first link in the description. Whether you're currently on Mounjaro, considering it, or simply trying to understand what's happening in your body, I think it could give you the clarity you've been looking for. I want to come back to the woman I mentioned at the beginning, the one who couldn't open the jar. Because her story didn't end there. When she understood what had happened, when she finally connected the muscle loss to the medication and the menopause and the declining hormonal support, she made changes. She didn't stop the medication immediately, but she modified her approach. She started resistance training 3 times a week. She restructured her eating to prioritize protein. She requested body composition monitoring. And slowly, carefully, deliberately, she began rebuilding what had been lost. It wasn't fast. It wasn't easy. Rebuilding muscle during menopause is harder than maintaining it, significantly harder. But over the course of a year, she regained measurable strength. Her bone density stabilized. Her metabolic rate improved. And perhaps most importantly, she felt like she was making informed choices about her own body for the first time since she started the medication, because she finally had the information she needed to weigh the benefits against the real, specific, personal costs. That is what I want for every woman watching this. Not fear. Not a blanket rejection of medications that can genuinely help. But information. Complete, honest, specific information that accounts for who you are, not just a patient, but a woman in a particular stage of biological life, with a body that is navigating changes that the research hasn't fully caught up to yet. You deserve to know what you're trading when you step on that scale and celebrate. You deserve to know that the number going down might not be telling the whole story. You deserve to know that the muscle you lose today will be exponentially harder to rebuild tomorrow. And you deserve a healthcare conversation that treats you as a whole person, not just a weight on a chart. The scale is not the full story. It never was. And especially now, especially during this transition, the chapters it leaves out might be the ones that matter most. The chapters about what your muscles are doing, about what your bones are losing, about the metabolic engine that is quietly powering down while the numbers on the screen make everything look like a victory. If this changed the way you think about your body, your medication, or your next conversation with your doctor, then do something with that clarity. Subscribe to this channel, because this is exactly the kind of information we explore here. The things that nobody else is willing to say out loud. Share this with a woman in your life who might be on this medication or considering it, because she deserves the full picture too. And keep coming back. Because the more you understand about what's happening inside you, the more power you have to protect it. Your body is speaking to you. It's time someone helped you understand the language.